So today we are going to talk about the Ace Combat series. I actually did not really get into this series until about sometime in the PS3 generation. I actually only played the original Air Combat as a kid, but I never really got into the sequels. Pretty decent flight combat series overall. Very arcadey though, so like if you're like the Microsoft Flight Simulator type, like probably best to look elsewhere. But I've always been more of a space combat kind of person, so aerial combat was never really that big for me, and it's still really not. There's a couple of other series I like too, but Ace Combat's pretty much the main one when I need to go to like air combat instead of space combat. But anyways, that original game, the one I actually did play on original hardware as a kid, it's got some flaws. I will give it credit for being the first game on PlayStation 1 when the DualShock was not a thing. It did its best. I don't know why they actually renamed it Air Combat as well in the States as well, but that's localization for you. The biggest problem with it is the controls. The lacking any sort of DualShock really hurts it, so it's almost impossible to play it like as an actual flight simmy type game and using expert controls. You really only can play this on baby mode with novice settings and just turning with the D-pad instead of like properly rolling and then pulling up or using the yaws. Apart from that, the graphics are pretty decent for its time. It had a pretty good soundtrack, so audio-visual is definitely a plus for an old PS1 game. Oh yeah, and like I won't be talking about the arcade version of these older ones, nor will I talk about the mobile games, for obvious reasons. So, I believe the arcade game came out before the PlayStation game, as well. So I don't know how that stacks up. Biggest problem is the fact that it's really short. It's only like 2 hours long, at best. There's like 15 missions, there's barely any story to it. And the only other thing to do besides replaying those missions is like a bare bones 2-player mode, which I think was pretty much dropped in a lot of the later titles. But I'd say low B. It hasn't aged well, it's not great, but as a starting point, and there's the PS1, it was alright. A sequel was considerably better, though not a huge improvement. Visually, it looked about the same. It had the best soundtrack in this series, if you ask me. It had basically the same problems as a lot of the same problems as the first one, besides the controls, since this one was DualShock compatible. So you could actually play it properly. That was the big improvement. And it had more content to it, but as it basically the same. It was just a marginal improvement for that said content. I would say this one's also a B, better than the first one, but not like apart from nostalgia. There's probably not a huge reason to go back to the first two games. The third one is an interesting case. This one is a bit more of a modern, well, not modern, but a near future sci-fi type situation. And you wouldn't know it if you're playing it in the West, because someone had the genius idea of cutting out the entire freaking story when they localized it. And this is the first game that really focused on story somewhat. And not only did they cut the entire story out, but they cut like a third of the missions out, because in the Japanese one, there's a branching campaign with multiple endings. In the US version, you just play like about 2/3 of them sequentially, and you get fuck all story telling you what the hell's going on. I actually have not played the US version. I just waited for the translation patch to be completed. I've seen people play the US version. It just does not look... Just don't. Unless you have the game, you bought the game as a kid or something, just play the Japanese version of the translation patch. It's so much better. And I'm not trying to be a weeb. It's just like having the branching campaign and the actual story just makes so much better. Though I will say the story makes very little sense. It's very nonsensical. It's kind of like Skycrawlers in that sense. This one's a bit hard to rank because the US version I would say is a low B, but the Japanese version I'd say is like a top B, maybe a very low A. So I'll just average it and say it's better. It's put it above the first two. From gameplay standpoint, I will say though it wasn't that much different from the first two. The big improvement was on the graphical side because it looked a lot better than 1 and 2 did. It had actual like textures for the ground and such. Like it wasn't a huge leap like say to Ace Combat 4, but you know it was pretty good for a PS1 game. Now we come to 4, the game the fanboys love, and I'm going to say right now this game is overrated. That's not to say it's a bad game before you start jumping on me. It is quite a good game, but this is not the best Ace Combat game. I can think of several that are better. Now I will say it was quite a bit of leap in audio visuals. Obviously a big part of that's new hardware, but it did look pretty good for its time. It still looks fairly good, as do the other PS2 games. It runs very well. Like, you know, a lot of PS2 games have issues with frame rate, and the Ace Combat games do not. Or at least 4 and 5 do. I don't remember if 0 like ran worse or not. It's been a while since I played that one. This is for the US guys, and I'm assuming Europe as well, because I think Europe also got the cut version of 3, unless they didn't get it at all. This is the first one to focus on story for us Western people. The story was okay. Like, I don't know why they act like this is like the magnus opus of Ace Combat stories, because both 5, 7, and I think one other one makes and I think 6 makes references to it. And I'm just like, the story was alright, but it wasn't that good. I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to shit on this game, but I'm just saying it's not as great as people remember. The big problem for me, besides the fact the story wasn't that good for how much people hyped it up, was the mission system. The vast majority of them are just racking up points within a specific time limit. It kind of gets repetitive. There's very little variety in the mission types, apart from like noticeable ones like the final mission or the first couple of missions. It's a good game again, but it's overrated. It's still an A tier though. I had a good time with it, and I'm sure everyone else does, but for someone who doesn't have those nostalgia goggles, I can see its flaws. Now, the main game I will point to as being the best one is 5. And while it does... Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention, 4 also was the first one. I will give it credit for being the first one to introduce special weapons. And I say this because this is one thing I could say is negative against 5. 4, you had the ability to choose between multiple special weapons per plane. 5, they're all tied to each plane. So if the plane you want has a special weapon you don't like, yeah. But the flip side is you can customize your squad mates' planes now. Which brings me to another point. This is the first time that the AI is actually capable of getting kills instead of just being minor decoys like they were in the first 4 games. Audio visuals, there's not a huge jump between this and 4. It's a little bit better. I will say this is the first game where they started moving away from the techno and rock soundtracks to more like movie-esque soundtracks, which is not a good thing. Granted, there's still the techno and rock soundtrack are still there. It's just most of them are in the arcade mode. Another reason I like 5 so much is because the content is quite meaty for an Ace Combat game. There's about, I think, 30 campaign missions. And there's quite a bit of variety in those missions too, unlike a lot of the previous games. And once you finish the campaign, there's also an arcade mode that I mentioned before, which is basically similar to something like an instant action mode. But and it has branching paths, so you know you definitely got your money's worth in this game if you ask me. And it also had the best story, at least in my opinion. It was a lot meatier than 4's was. Basically, most of the complaints I have for this game are very minor. I would say this is an S tier. What is not an S tier is Ace Combat Advance. I'm not sure why they tried to make a GBA game when the GBA is just not cut out for these types of games. But what they did is turn it into like a top-down shooter. And honestly, if they had made it a shoot-'em-up, I probably would have had more respect for it. But that's not what they did. They like made it like a very slow-paced and bare-bones top-down shooter. I will say it does look fairly okay for a GBA game, but that's as far as I will go as far as giving it any sort of credit. The controls are not good. The gameplay sucks. Like, it is hard as all shit. And this is not a get good moment. It's just genuinely designed bad. You move slow as molasses. This is a prequel to 3, but you wouldn't know it because it's fuck all in terms of story. It's extremely short. It's about an hour long, and it's just aggravating to play. Yeah, there's nothing good about it. F tier. Don't play it. 0. I was actually pretty excited about this game after playing 5 because this is a prequel to it, and a lot of, honestly, pretty much a prequel to everyone except for like the original. Despite its name, it's not actually doesn't take place before the original. The problem is a lot of the stuff that they talk about the Balkan War in 5, this game does not address. Like, it addresses a few of the major things, like them nuking the borders, but, like, a lot of the things that the characters talk about just are not present, so I found that to be kind of disappointing. The story is also just, in general, a lot toned down compared to 5. They dropped the 4 with having 3 customizable wingmen to just having 1. They introduced this really dumb morality mechanic, which I don't know why they thought that was a good idea. The final boss is fuck the final boss. That shit was a pain in the ass. And it's also a lot shorter than a lot of the previous entries. I think it's only like marginally longer than the original, actually. So what's there isn't bad. It's just like it's more disappointing than anything else. I'd say it's a mid B. X also has a bit of a content problem like 0, though it has a bit more since it has a dynamic campaign that can change a bit depending on what order you take on missions or if you skip missions. That's pretty much about the only notable thing for it. I will say this is probably the best of the handheld Ace Combats. I'm not sure why they just keep trying to push it on the handheld. It just never really worked apart from X, and even X has its issues. The screen real estate can make it really hard to tell where things are, especially when on the ground. Which sucks, because there are a couple of missions that involve you not having radar. The controls are okay. They're not as bad as like Ace Combat 1, where you have to play it in baby mode. But it definitely takes some getting used to. It's because, you know, the lack of buttons don't help. But I found that Expert C works the best for me. The campaign is alright. And again, there's not a whole lot to the game. It's kind of light on content. The story is forgettable. It looks okay for a PSP game. It's just really the screen real estate crunch just makes it harder than it need to be. It's still doable. But, I don't know. I'd say this is also a mid-B. 6. 6 was also pretty good. I would say... I'm going to say right now this is probably equal to 4, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose 6 over 4. One of the main problems it has is like a lot of the missions rely too much on one single gimmick like 4 did. Though I will say I think I preferred this one. Instead of racking up kills within a limited time, or racking up points within a limited time, this one has an operation feature where you have to engage in separate theaters and move between them based on how badly your allies are doing. It can make missions a bit more tedious than it need to be, but again, I will take that over just racking up points and time limit. It was a pretty noticeable jump in graphics. The game does look pretty good. The main problem is the FPS is reduced to 30. It's not bad enough to where it gets in the way, but it can make it a bit tedious at times because you just don't have that fluid reaction time. But beyond that, it stands up to 4 and 5, really. The story is alright. I'd say it's a little bit better than 4's, but it's still kind of forgettable. Despite the fact that there's only like 15 missions, this one does have a fairly decent runtime because a lot of those missions are lengthy, which is probably why you get a crap ton of ammo. Yeah, I'm going to say this is still an A tier, equal to 4, more or less. I'm thankful they actually made this backwards compatible on the Bone and the Series X, because beyond that, that game is locked in the 360, which is, you know, the Red Ring of Death machine. And probably not what machine people keep hooked up, because like most games in the 360 are either been made backwards compatible or are become multi-plat in some way or another. So yeah, if you didn't have a 360 or skipped out on it, but you do have a Bone or a Series X for whatever reason, I'd pick it up. You can find it pretty cheap, and it's a good game. The Skycrawlers, Innocent Aces. Despite the name, despite the fact this isn't technically an Ace Combat game, it was made by the developers that made the Ace Combat series. It's a flight arcade combat game that plays like Ace Combat. It's Ace Combat. The only difference is it uses more World War II-esque technology with prop planes instead of jets, but I think they actually did a pretty good job of adapting the series' mechanics to that. The main issue I have is the controls, and not because of motion controls, though the motion controls are fine. You do also have the ability to use, I think, GameCube controllers and classic controllers, so you can find whichever works. The problem I have is there's like an aggressive auto leveling system that you can't turn off that can make it difficult. It can really interfere with some of your turns, and I've crashed in the ground or the mountains more than once because it didn't want to pull up as fast because of that auto leveling mechanic. So be careful with that, but beyond that, I don't have too many gripes with it. The story is absolutely nonsensical as hell, like probably about equal to 3's story in that regard. Like, I shit you not, at the end of the game, like, the chick who fucking says how she'll follow you anywhere joins the other side, and then proceeds to shoot down her allies that she joined just so she can have a one with you. It's stupid, and it makes no sense. And before you say, well, watch the movie, I watched the movie. The movie does not really explain much. And besides, that movie was pretty boring in my opinion. Thankfully, the game was pretty decent. I would say maybe a high B for this one. You can find it pretty cheap still, so if you missed it because you didn't know it was technically an Ace Combat game, I'd give it a play. Just be aware that, you know, you might have to get used to the controls and that auto-leveling mechanic. But again, it's a pretty good adaptation to using World War II tech. Now we get into the weird phase where they dropped the numbering system and wanted to go with the Assault moniker. The first one was a second PSP game called Joint Assault, and a lot of people talk shit about Assault Horizon. For me, this was one of the worst ones. I really did not care for it. I don't understand it. They changed the control schemes to where I could find one that worked in X. Here I could not. I had to change this one to baby mode because what they did to compensate for it just did not work. And for whatever reason, they thought it would be a good idea to abandon the Strange World setting and move to an actual real-world setting because I guess that's what they thought the modern audience was back then. The story is probably the worst in the series. Or, well, the worst of the ones that actually had stories, because it's boring and nonsensical. Which is another thing I don't understand why they put this one in the real world, because they brought over, like, Ace Combat features like giant airships. It's like, okay. But, yeah, it's basically X, but with worse missions, worse story, and worse controls. I'd say a low C. The second one, Assault Horizon, is the one everyone bitches about, but I didn't really have that much problem with it. I'm not going to say it's a good game, but it's not a bad one either. The main thing people complain about is dogfighter mode, but you don't actually have to use that unless you're fighting boss level aces. Those you are forced to use the dogfight mode. But when you're just fighting regular pilots, you can shoot them down like normal. You do not have to use the dogfighter mode for regular enemies. That's another one that's set in the real world, unfortunately. They did try to break it up a bit by having helicopter and side gunner missions. Well, I thought the helicopter ones were fun little breaks. The side gunner missions were not. It's basically the same kind of turret gunning sections you see in other games. Why they put it in this, I don't know. But that's probably the worst part. Thankfully, there are not too many of them. Again, I'd say it's probably still a C tier, but it's better than Joint Assault. Like, I found it somewhat enjoyable. And again, you can probably get it for dirt cheap. Assault Horizon Legacy, I don't know why they called this, because this is a remake of 2. Yeah, instead of calling it, like, they could have called it Ace Combat 2 Assault Legacy or something, or Ace Combat 2 Horizon, but no, they called it Assault Horizon Legacy, so who the hell is going to realize this is a remake of 2? And unfortunately, it's not a particularly good one. Obviously, it looks better. I will give it that. And I do appreciate the fact they fleshed out the story some, though it's still pretty bare bones. The main problem I have with this is the controls suck, even if you use the Circle Pad Pro or the new 3DS's nub. So this is another one you have to play in baby mode. Why it's like that way, I don't know, because again, they could have learned from X, and they could have made use of the Circle Pad Pro and the 3DS's controls. Although I think you can only do that in the Plus version. But, yeah, it's basically 2, but for the most part worse. Looks better, but plays worse. And, oh yeah, they butchered the soundtrack. They took one of the best soundtracks and turned it into one of the worst ones in the whole series, apart from maybe Assault Horizon. Yeah, this is another C tier. I'd say it's probably better than Joint Assault, but, like, there's no reason to play this over 2. Just play 2. Now, if you're surprised that Joint Assault, the failed remake of 2 and Assault Horizon didn't kill the series, I'm not, because, like, I think the only issue with those is declining sales. What I'm surprised didn't kill the series was Infinite. Yeah, they thought it was a good idea to make a PS3 exclusive live service game. It was free to play, but it was so stupid. You had to grind in multiplayer to unlock the single player missions, not that there were a lot of those. And those single player missions weren't very good. I will say it looked better and was smoother than Assault Horizon, and it didn't have dogfighter mode, so like a lot of people appreciated it for that, but for me it was just like, it's a shitty live service game that is now shut down, so you know what that means? Yeah. Nobody's reason to talk about it. And the final game, which unfortunately may still stay the final game because I don't know if it's sold particularly well. Ace Combat 7. I don't blame people for skipping out on this one, but I do blame people for not looking into it more because I thought 7 was quite good. And if this does end up being the final game in the series, then we'll call it a swan song or a good send-off. The story was kind of weird, but not as nonsensical as, say, I don't know, Skycrawlers or 3. But, I liked it. The campaign was fairly meaty. Not as much as 5, but there's a decent variety of the missions. They did an aircraft tree, which comes with customizable planes and upgrades, similar to what X and Joint Assault did, but far better. The AI is fairly decent in this. At least the enemy AI is. Main thing is there's a huge jump in graphics. The game actually looks pretty good. It also, unlike 6, it also runs pretty smooth, which is important. So this is probably the smoothest game in the series, actually. It feels very good to play. This main problem I have is the fact that the PlayStation 4 version has a set of a mini campaign that acts like a prequel to 4, much like the arcade mode did in 5. Or not prequel, sorry, an epilogue. But they're locked behind VR. And I have played this mode back when I did have a PSVR. There's only like 3 or 4 missions, but that actually was pretty fun playing in VR. It's just unfortunate that this is locked in the PS4 mode, so the PC version does not get it. And it's locked behind a device that most people probably don't even have. And if you play on PS5, guess what? You can't use PS2's VR to play that mode. Yeah, that kind of sucks, but thankfully the main game is quite good. I'd say go as far as to say this is my second favorite. Yeah, that unfortunately does it for the acecombat series, and it doesn't look like there's anything new on the horizon. But if you still wanted more, which I certainly did, there is another game on. I don't remember if it's Steam exclusive. No, I think it's also on PS5 called Project Wingman. I think it's an indie game, but it's basically like acecombat. Like, it's a love letter to acecombat. So if you haven't played it already, I would highly recommend getting it. It goes on sale fairly frequently, and even when it doesn't, it's not too expensive. It just trust me on that. It's even fully playable in VR, unlike 7, which is just a short mini campaign. And you don't have to use the PS1 VR to do it. So yeah. Anyways, that does it for acecombat. It's a pretty good series overall. Had a few low points and really only 2 turds, one of which is the live service game. So if you're looking for arcade combat, I'd give it a try.